Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast by Triad Behavioral Health, where we cover trending topics in behavioral and mental health. This podcast is designed to share unique and relevant topics occurring within the world, our communities, and bring them a mental health perspective.
Hello, I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor, and with me today is Dr. Jana Martin. After years of independent practice, Dr. Martin became Trust CEO in 2010. Dr. Martin was co-chair of the Task Force on the Development of Telepsychology Guidelines for Psychologists and was co-author with Drs. Campbell and Milan on a Telepsychology Casebook, using technology ethically and effectively in your professional practice. She has been commended by the American Psychological Association with a presidential citation and is a recipient of the Rosalie G. Weiss Award for Outstanding Leaders in Psychology from the American Psychological Foundation. Dr. Martin is a nationally recognized and has published and presented numerous times within the professional psychological community. Personally, Jana is one of my very favorite people in life, and I am so happy to have her on the show today. Jana, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Graham. And I especially like the last part because I feel exactly the same.
Oh, you're very kind. Well, Jana, today we're talking about an area of expertise and specialty for you. You have a number of areas that are of expertise for you, but today's topic, telemental health, and I'm excited to get into this one. Telehealth, or telemental health in this case, is therapy conducted over the internet, typically through video conferencing, and it allows practitioners to extend their service reach and for patients to have a greater access to treatment, in this case, mental health treatment. And we've seen a growing trend over the years incorporating telemental health as a medium for conducting psychotherapy, as around 80 million Americans live, as we know, in a mental health professional shortage area, according to U.S. Health and Human Services. However, we've experienced what we're seeing as an unprecedented explosion of its use over the past several months due to the pandemic that we're experiencing. So Jenna, as we talk today about therapists and patients conducting and connecting through telemental health, their treatment together, I'd like to address several aspects of its use with you, starting with consideration for the therapists. So with telehealth becoming a growing medium for conducting therapy, what are some of the areas of particular importance for practitioners to be familiar with that you see?
Certainly. Well, there are a lot. I'll try to hit the high points, of course. I think it would be negligent on my part if the first thing that came out of my mouth was not about making sure you know what your ethics codes are for your area of specialty in mental health practice. Every dimension of mental health practice has an ethics code, and it's very important not just to know that there is one, but to have a copy of it that you can regularly review and study so that when you're finding yourself in a difficult position, you're not caught off guard. Additionally, there are numerous guidelines available for the practice of telehealth, telemental health, telepsychology. And also important are the legal standards governing practice. And in that regard, one of the things that I find most people, especially now, as they are, as you said, being thrust into telemental health practice, they are dizzied by all of the changes that are coming out. The federal government says this, Medicare says that, this association says this, and sometimes it's really hard to know, well, what do I pay attention to? And I think when we're looking at how do you make sure you're doing it well and appropriately, it's important to remember that state government and law governs practice of mental health, not the federal government. And so it's important for you to know where to go to look at what does your state law say about the practice of telemental health and what temporary changes might there be. It's easy to get confused.
Yeah, there's a lot of communication right now about what is being allowed and what's billable, and I like the reminder that it's the state and local government that's going to be dictating that for your state and for your practice. And I also really like the reminder to be familiar with our ethics and not just read it once, go through it in school, but to review it and to align yourself almost as a North Star in the way we practice. So I really like that encouragement. You know, speaking about the ethical piece of this too, the foundation of our work in therapy is about privacy and confidentiality, and that allows for the building of trust and the allowance of transparency. How should practitioners conducting telehealth ensure and work to communicate to their patients how to best consider privacy and communication and the confidentiality in that in their work together?
One of the things that it's helpful when you're looking at doing telepractice is to think about how is it different from in-person, in the same room practice. And while there are a lot of similarities, there are also some pretty important differences. And when you're looking at privacy and confidentiality, it's really important to think about that. So, for example, if I'm doing therapy in my office and the client or patient is in the office with me, I don't have to worry about someone stealing our conversation or our communication. They might be recording it, but they're not going to be able to reprint it. But when you are doing telehealth, many times what you have to think about is, wow, can I assure confidentiality? What about privacy settings on my equipment and on my client or patients? What about other safeguards? And because confidentiality and privacy is so essential, it's important for us to think about in advance, but also to be very clear with our clients or patients that we talk with them, not just verbally, but that we provide them with a written statement about the limitations of confidentiality, the very beginning of treatment. So this statement should inform clients of what are the limitations. We have some of the same limitations as you would in person, like child abuse reporting, certain mandates, but also what about broadcasting limitations? What's the likelihood that there could be a technology failure, something we don't have to deal with in in-person treatment? What do? You have to think ahead. What about if you have saved any material on your devices and those devices are stolen? How can you protect that information? What about outdated technology, use of social media, or ensuring that when you're conducting telehealth sessions, that the individual and the provider have some privacy? Are people going to be walking by and interrupting the session, or are there going to be noises that might in some way interfere? So you certainly need to be aware of those kinds of issues, but basic security protocols to ensure that sensitive patient data are never placed at unnecessary risk is very important.
At the beginning of our time today, you were saying there are so many considerations moving from a face-to-face in-office practice to the telemental health practice that we don't even think about. And some of them you're talking about right now. And there are so many to consider that we may not naturally go down the paths you're taking us right now. At the end of our time today, I'm going to be asking you for some resources that practitioners interested in kind of following up with our talk and ensuring that they're practicing in right and safe ways, we can refer them to. Staying with the ethical piece of this, we know that as practitioners in general, we need to practice within the realm of our competence and training. And I'm wondering, how does practicing within one's area of competence possibly get challenged in unique ways in conducting telehealth? And are there some slippery slopes that practitioners can be thinking through ahead of time?
Yes, certainly. I mentioned a little while ago was technological interruptions. And I think that while we all want to hope that technology holds out, and maybe it's been reliable in 25 sessions, it's possible on the 26th session that something goes wrong, there's a loss of connection. But so from the technological perspective, you need to anticipate and plan for that. So have something in writing that you and your client or patient have talked about. If we lose connection, here's what we do. If it's a technological glitch, wait 2 minutes. I'll try to call you back. I'll reach back out to you. But one of the things that we need to think about is, what if there's a loss of connection because of an emotional state that the client is in? When you're in the room with the client, you can do your best to contain that individual. You have a lot more strategies that you can use. But when all they have to do is click leave meeting, what have you planned in advance? So while we all need to be aware of emergency services that are available, we're so accustomed to being aware of them in our exact locale. When you're doing teleservices, you have to know what the resources are in the location of the recipient of the services. Emergency services, how do you contact them? What's available so that you could make an immediate connection, either for your client who calls in a panic, or when your client disconnects or misses a session and had previously contacted you about some emerging situation about which they were very distressed. So I think that the slippery slope is getting comfortable.
Yes.
Oh, I can see them. I can talk with them. I've got their phone number. Well, you could become overconfident with that. And it's important to know planning ahead when you're doing telemental health takes on a different dimension.
I like the idea of getting out in front of that, kind of preemptively talking about those things and considering them, because in a face-to-face, you're right, you can read those things in the first couple of sessions for an intake. You can begin to see where some of the work might be going, and you can have the person in front of you, should they, kind of dip down to some difficult places, or maybe even begin to kind of slowly decompensate a wee bit. You can hold that differently. But in a telemental health session, you're limited and you're in some ways kind of helpless to do some things online that you could do more when you're face to face. So I like the idea of getting out in front of it ahead of time and putting that into the conversation about how might we address some of these things as we go down, maybe some of the difficult topics that we get to and are allowed to address together in our work. People wonder, well, what is it like to do in-office versus online therapy? And is there kind of an effectiveness, any data around the differences between an internet-based therapy and like a face-to-face therapy? And I was doing some research around this as this all started to kind of boom. And there was a study done of 92 studies, and they showed that there's really no statistically significant difference between the two modalities, internet-based therapy and face-to-face. And some peer-reviewed publications on video therapy show that there's high patient satisfaction and there's a moderate to high clinician satisfaction. And there's also, been found to be positive clinical outcomes. So, as we talk about this, the encouraging piece is that we have to use this during this time because of the pandemic and, quarantining and social distancing, which I like to call personal spacing. We know that if one needs or desires to pursue treatment, via an online surface, they're likely to have a very positive and very helpful experience. And it allows clinicians to maintain continuity in their service and also provide their services to those that, may not necessarily come in. In your experience and with those, you've done so much in this field already before it even began to kind of boom, writing the principles and guidelines. But as you've talked to practitioners and you've listened to them share the differences that they're experiencing in doing telehealth versus face-to-face, what are some of the things you're hearing in terms of their feedback to you?
So a couple of things. I think that it will be interesting to see the research that is based on the use of telemedicine, telepsychology, telemental health when it is thrust upon you. The research that you've referred to is when people have actively made a choice, this is what I'd like to do. This is what I am comfortable with.
Yeah.
And it assumes that the people, the clients or patients who are interested are technologically competent. Well, when you're thrust into this, you have to think about technical competence on the part of the provider, but also on the part of the recipient. And one of the things that we are actually hearing is that because this is not a choice for many people at this time, and they didn't have the kind of time to make planful efforts and build up their systems and talk to their clients in great detail and maybe do practice run-throughs without feeling like there was an absolute necessity of speed to get up to speed. What we're seeing is that a lot of clients are not interested in it. They're not comfortable with it, or they don't know how to do it. And if they already were burdened with stresses, already had some insecurities, which might be the basis of why they were seeking treatment in the first place, to thrust them into a potential playground of incompetence and threats to their feeling of competence. We have heard that some people have said, you know what, my clients have just said, I'll wait till I can come back and see you in person. Interestingly, one of the things that we're seeing is people are forgetting that we've actually, in many regards, been doing telemedicine, telehealth long before videos because we use the telephone. So it's important for us to remember that if you have clients or patients who are not comfortable, but they can't really do without treatment, then consider maybe supplementing. Every 3 sessions is a video call so that you get a chance to look at them and you have a chance to assess something about them. But maybe you do some sessions on the telephone too. Now, billing and whether or not it's going to be reimbursed are other issues. One cannot assume that it will be reimbursed equally or at all. There are some coverages that do not pay for just telephone connection.
You know, I talk about having it thrust upon you and there being a learning curve, both for practitioner and for the patient. I had just come back from Europe and I realized that I had to go into a 14-day quarantine upon my return. It was right when they were closing down the travel from Europe to the United States. So we got back just within that window and I had to go into a 14-day quarantine. And so I literally flipped my practice from face-to-face to all online for that 14 days. I still do some social distancing for the handful of people that want to see me as an essential business, but you know, large majority. And so it really was a learning curve. I'd already been doing some telemental health. So it wasn't much of a learning curve for me. And we have an insurance company here, probably the largest insurance company here, that already had a portal that we were able to use, which was great. But on the patient side, you're right. We had some learning curve together and some little challenges. Also, too, interestingly, having done the therapy, and I'm curious as to what you've heard about this, I was reading an article recently that talks about the fatigue experienced by practitioners using a computer screen pretty much throughout their day to conduct the therapy. They refer to it as Zoom fatigue, but it's an exhaustion that really applies to any, you know, if you're using a Google Hangout or a Skype or FaceTime or GoToMeeting, whatever it may be, these virtual interactions that we have are extremely fatiguing and hard on the brain. Have you heard something similar?
Absolutely. I noticed it first on the listservs. My colleagues commenting on, are you more tired or is it just me? I mean, what is it? But certainly with a few more weeks behind us, there have been a lot of people who have written about it. I have found some fascinating things, maybe not evidence-based research, more anecdotal at this point, but I'm pretty sure we'll have some evidence-based research pretty soon. But what I have found to be fascinating, and it makes sense, is that when we're working with people in person in the same room, while we certainly are focusing on what they're saying, we're also focusing on nonverbal cues.
That's right.
We're looking at body language. A lot of us talk with our hands. Our clients do too. We're able to see their gaze differently, the way they shift in their seats. And in some of the video calls, you're reduced to a thumbnail. And you have to sit up real close to see the details from somebody. And so what's happening is our brains are hyper-focused on searching for nonverbal cues that sometimes it just can't find because the screen or the picture is too small, or it's only from the chest up. There's a Dr. Franklin, who's assistant professor of cyber psychology at Norfolk State University in Virginia. And he talks about a term that actually first was brought into being by Linda Stone, who was a technical writer, and it's called continuous partial attention. It's an automatic process which we engage in where we are constantly scanning and trying to optimize opportunities to make connections with other people so that we don't miss anything. Well, when you're looking at a thumbnail or a smaller picture and maybe you can't see that picture as well or the lighting is poor, we're in constant search mode, constant search mode. And so that's a different way of practicing and interacting and trying to connect. The other thing that I think is at play here is that, again, if we feel that we're just partially there, we're partially a person, we may be trying to emote more or more strongly to communicate different feelings and thoughts or challenges. That takes a lot more energy than what we're used to. It's something that's different. And then another factor is, I mentioned thumbnail. Well, for some people, the picture is huge and the person's face is 12 inches away. And so there's this kind of, oh my goodness, this is, I'm right there.
That's right.
And so that can be exhausting as well.
Yeah.
Not to mention, Graham, that, we're not used to seeing ourselves talk. We're not used to watching our facial expressions.
Yes.
We're not used to seeing what our clients see. And sometimes we get distracted by that. We get self-conscious. Plus, the research tells us that at about 1.2 seconds, if there's a delay, which frequently happens with video technology, it can lead to a perception that the responder is less friendly or not as focused.
Yeah.
And then silences, which we as clinicians regard in their own environment and make interpretations variously. Now, when you're doing telepsychology, some of our first thoughts are, oh no, the computer's frozen.
Exactly.
There's a lot that's running in the background that not normally runs when we're in person. And so I think those, along with a bazillion other factors that we probably don't have time to go into, it makes good sense that we're exhausted or fatigued.
Yeah, I would agree. I heard recently just a little hack, a little trick to help reduce some of the fatigue is to turn your camera off if you can, so you're not watching yourself and the person at the same time. They say it kind of helps. It's one less brain task and allows you to kind of focus. Also, there are so many nuanced aspects to our work, whether someone's tapping their feet or their posture with their arms folded, et cetera. And all the things you mentioned are all part of the therapy that we get to hold up and together look at in what turns out to be very therapeutic and helpful ways. But when you just have the face, or kind of just like a bust shot, it's very different. However, I've also found there's kind of a silver lining around that too, because there's some micro, expressions that happen at times. And there's kind of in the large screen that you may not see when you're sitting, 8 feet across from somebody in your office or so, that you can also use as feedback and just kind of hold that space. I know we're kind of coming to a close of our time, but I want to come back to something we had talked about. As practitioners, having jumped into it already because of the need, can you recommend for us some trainings that you feel would be important for those starting out, or for those trainings that could be helpful for those that are already ongoing? Direct us to those in ways that people can really make sure that they're aligning what they're doing in their work on this online platform, whatever they're using. So it's lining up with being safe, practicing effectively, staying therapeutic. Give us some suggestions, would you please?
Sure. And of course, I'm going to lead off with resources that our company has already.
I hope you would. I hope you would. Because I hope you would, because you folks do it right. And I know that you've been working with the guidelines. So please, I'd love to hear what the trust has put together for us.
Sure. So there are a number of things that are both video as well as print tip sheets or whatever. We have several webinars that we have on the basics of telepsychology. How do you get started? What are some things you need to remember? And then, of course, risk management in telepsychology. What do you need to be mindful of? So one of our websites and one of the pieces of the trust is Trust Parma. It stands for Trust Practice and Risk Management Association. And so we have several virtual webinar series, 1-hour programs where our risk managers talk about it, or experts. We even have a telehealth community chat.
Oh,
and they're available. And so the website is Parma, PARMA .trustinsurance, all one word, .com /workshops -webinars /virtual -webinar -series.
Very good.
You can go to the trustinsurance.com website as well. And for those in allied healthcare professions, go to trustrms.com/resources, numerous resources. There are also several books that are available. There's one that my cohorts in developing the guidelines, Doctors Linda Campbell and Fred Majan, we co-edited a book which is available through APA Press. And it goes through several different settings. It's called a Telepsychology Casebook, using technology ethically and effectively in your professional practice.
Good.
And that came out in 2018.
Very good. Very good. We're going to put those links. I want to make sure they're on our website, so you have access. Those listening have access to those. Those are tremendous resources. And you folks do a terrific job through the Trust putting these together to really ensure that people are practicing safely. And if we're doing that, we get to practice freely, which I love. So, well, Jana, thank you so much for being with us today as we talked about telemental health. And as always, it was great to be with you.
And same here. Thank you. I look forward to future conversations.
I look forward to it as well. And to you listeners, thanks for joining us on Behavioral Health Today. We look forward to you joining us on our next podcast.
Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.